Hi, everybody. My name is Jim, and I am an alcoholic. It's good to see everybody. Some friendly faces out there, folks I know. And Stephen, thank you so much for doing this, creating the space for us. Um, those folks who might be new to this process, in AA, we tell our stories, which in life we don't really get a chance to hear people's stories. We may know people at work, we may know them in our life, but we just don't get to know what their stories are. And we're very fortunate in AA that that's a fundamental part of what we do is we get to hear people's stories. And the big book, is half instructions and half stories. And so I always love hearing people's stories, and I'm kind of curious tonight to see what mine is. Uh, one of the opportunities that comes up when I tell my story is sort of, I didn't know that. I didn't realize that. It's a way to kind of capture where I'm sitting in 2024. So with that, in our format, we say what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And that's just a classic 3-act play, right? Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back. That's essentially what the story is. And in my case, my drinking started, like, actually the very first drink I had was stealing some whiskey from my dad in the pantry. And I didn't particularly like the taste. I think I was probably 6 or 7 years old. After that, I would drink sacramental wine after Mass. We knew the priest that drank all the wine and the priest that only drank a little wine. And we would like to serve the Masses for the priests that just take a little, because at the end of Mass, there'd be leftover wine in the chalice and we'd finish that off. But my first serious drink accompanied my first serious drunk. And I was 13 years old. And I blacked out. And I remember getting in a car with somebody. I was hitchhiking. And I think about that today. I was in 8th grade, and I've raised a few 8th graders. And I am horrified at thinking about the fact that, I would have been drunk at that age, blacked out at that age. But as we have heard over and over and over in AA meetings, I heard it twice today in a meeting, I had arrived, boy meets girl. I finally had something that I could excel at, something I could be good at. And it wasn't long after that that I smoked my first bowl of weed. And Jimmy, my best friend Jimmy, I remember even telling him I didn't want to do it because there was something inside of me that knew that once I started, I wasn't going to be able to stop. I mean, the fact that I had the premonition of the phenomenon of craving was pretty significant to me. And incidentally, Jimmy, who I first got high with when I was 13, was a casualty of this disease. He didn't make it to 20 years old. He shot himself in the head. And I was often running, as many of us are. I was drinking on the way to school. I was drinking, standing out in front of drugstores, getting folks to buy wine. I'd get 2 bottles of wine. I'd get the Annie Green Springs, and I'd chug one, and then I'd walk with my buddies. And that all came crashing down when I was about 14 and I had my first bust. I got busted. I had gotten involved with pissing off some neighbors, and they confronted my parents, and my parents came to get me. And my brother was home on leave from Vietnam, and I had gotten some of his dope. And when my dad confronted me, asking me where I'd gotten the dope, I caved immediately and pointed to my brother, um, who, by the way, my brother went back to Vietnam, and he was a corpsman, and he wound up in a treatment center that he actually worked in as a corpsman. And my brother got sober, and has remained sober for over 45 years, and is one of the guys that helped get NA started in Colorado. So I don't think I told you my sobriety date. My sobriety date is um, September 24th, 1976. So if you think I'm spending a little too much time in my teenagehood, there isn't much after my teenagehood. In fact, I've never had a legal drink in my life. I got sober when I was 20 years old. Thank God. And I was not happy about it. I was not happy at all. But after that first intervention, when I was 14 years old, I'm going to quit. I'm going to stop. This is it. I know somehow I get carried away with it and the other kids don't get carried away with it. And that lasted a few months. And I was back running again, drinking, getting high. In fact, I even did LSD for my Stanford achievement tests because somehow that made sense to me when I was 15 years old. I don't know. And I had a paper route. So my paper route was, you talk about losing jobs, losing losing wives, losing families. Yeah, I lost a job. I lost my paper route because of alcohol and drugs. And I lost it because I had spent all of the money from my paper route on things other than paying the paper company. And I was upside down and owed him about $100. And my friend Andy, who was also a paper boy, explained to me that if you get robbed, you're insured up to $100. And so it was Easter night, and we thought it was a good idea to get robbed that night. So Andy and I snuck out. And I had Andy punch me in the face so I could have some evidence of, being robbed, and didn't really break the skin or do anything that was too damaging. So I laid on the ground and I banged the back of my head on the basketball court where we played basketball. And I went back home and announced to the Easter gathering family that I had been robbed, and was taken to Denver General Hospital, where I had fractured my own skull. And in proof of that there is a God, I overheard the doctor tell my dad that oftentimes amnesia is accompanied with such a head wound. So I got amnesia immediately. And I was in a pediatric intensive care for 3 days. I was 15. And you don't get to go to big boy emergency room hospital until you're 16. So I was in the hospital with babies with a self-inflicted fractured skull. I was there because of drugs and alcohol, and I decided I had to quit. And 3 days later, I was back out of the hospital and I was running again. And what happened to me, I am enormously grateful for today, but I was not at the time. When I was 16, again, after continuing to promise myself I wasn't going to, and then promising myself I wasn't going to, picking up, my parents intervened again and they sent me to Alateen. And this was in 1972. And Alateen, I think because it had the name teen in it, and Allah seemed like the right place to send me to get me cleaned up. And it did. When I was 16 years old, I had the opportunity to do something that I had never done up to that point, and that's get some semblance of sanity into my life. And the program, the 12 steps, the fellowship, the meetings brought me a level of sanity I had never had. And it's important to understand this because this becomes much more important in my sobriety. And that is, I was born into an alcoholic home. I'm the youngest of 5 kids. And my dad went to AA the year I was born, and he didn't stick. And for the first 10 years of my life were the last 10 years of his drinking. And um, I'll give you just one incident that sort of characterizes what life was like at the Kennedy household. I'd come home from second grade and was sitting out on the steps of our apartment, and there was a padlock on the door, which was not an unusual thing. I was trained to sit on the porch and wait for my parents when the landlord had padlocked us. And my parents pulled up, got into the car, and we drove away. And we had been evicted from the house before that in Loveland, Colorado. We had been evicted from the house before that in Estes, Colorado. We had been kicked out of the motel before that in Loveland, Colorado. And then for the next several years, moved from motel to motel, kicked out, kicked out, kicked out. So you can see when I was 13 years old and I had the opportunity to do anything other than be in crazy land, I took it. And that degree of, I didn't know this for a long time, but that degree of sort of survival, being in a home where there is always the opportunity for violence, always the opportunity for the insecurity of whether or not you're going to have any food. We used to shop at a place called the Bent Can Store, which was really the freight salvage store. And my sisters and I would go across the street to the grocery stores and get the free samples for food, take it back to the motel. So that's an important thing for me, because when I'm 16 years old at Alateen, it's the first time that I have any kind of sense of normalcy. And my dad at this point had been sober a few years. And when my dad got sober in AA, it took him about 5 years just to not be just stone crazy. I would come home from school when I was 12, 13 years old, and he would have taken out the grates from the oven and had hung styrofoam cups from the ceiling and had created these mobiles, and he would sit and explain to me the nature of the universe, and he knew it when I wasn't paying attention. And so he went from being incredibly volatile and violent to being crazy as hell. And as I have moved through my sobriety, and as I have healed in my life, a lot of those underpinnings, a lot of those basic skills and it says in the book, the warped lives of blameless children. That's strong language, but it's true. And so when I went to Alateen, I got clean for 2 years. I got clean and sober. And I knew that there was something different about me. I knew that I could not use or drink. But when I was 18, I moved away, went up to Grand Lake, Colorado, and started working up there as a tour guide. And the next thing you know, I'm hanging out at the Foghorn and drinking and smoking a newly invented thing called a bong, which I, had to try. And what was so significant about that for me is I had, during those years from 16, I had made a connection with a power greater than myself. And anybody on this call and anybody who hears this, who has ever been connected, who loses it, it is one of the most painful things that you can go through. And I couldn't stop. I would promise myself that I was going to quit, and I would pick up again, and I would still try to go to AA meetings. In fact, I was on a panel. I was invited to be a speaker on a panel at the 75 AA World Conference. And what I did on the Young Al-Anon panel at the 75 AA World Conference was try to get the girl from New Jersey who's also on the panel to go leave with me and get high. So if that girl from New Jersey is somewhere out there, immense. But that was in 1975. The significance of me going back out and picking up again was I had experienced the second part of the disease. I knew I had a problem with drinking and drugging, and I knew that once I started, I couldn't stop. I knew that. But what I didn't know was that I couldn't bring into my mind at certain times the reason not to. In fact, I even started to incorporate AA stuff into my alcoholism. Try to drink and stop abruptly, try some controlled drinking. I tried that over and over again. And one particular night, we all have our curtains parting moment where the truth of our situation comes home. I was 20 years old. I had quit for 7 days, which was just bullshit to begin with, because I just did it that day and made up some story that I was going to quit for 7 days. It was 4 days later, and I was loaded again. And I sat on the couch at my friends and I's house, Don, who, by the way, Don also died of this disease before he was 20 years old. I sat in that house, and the fear of death, the primal, deep terror of death just came over me. And I knew that feeling because several years before that, I had a guy stick a gun in my stomach and murder the man standing next to me. So I knew what it felt like to have your life literally in the hands of something else. And my life was in the hands of my disease. And I sat there and the line in the big book, because I had been reading the big book this whole time, the line in the big book came up and said, or came into my mind and said, the alcoholic cannot bring into his consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the humiliation of even a week or a month ago. He is without defense against that first drink. And when I fully understood that there wasn't anything I could do to keep that thought from coming into my head, and that once I picked up, I would spiral down and get sucked into this black hole of self-hatred, of absolutely living and doing the things I did not want to do. And I was pissed off. I was 20 years old, and I had failed at even being an alcoholic. I mean, I had low self-esteem anyway, but this is low self-esteem at being an alcoholic. I wasn't able to make the grade like the great alcoholics that I knew, the ones that had lost families and jobs, and I was just a lightweight. But I could not escape the fact that I could not stay clean and sober, and I could not pick up. And it wasn't an addiction. It was an allergy once I picked up. And when that hit me, when I really fully conceded to my innermost self that I have this disease, I have to tell you, it's one of the most important things that's ever happened to me. And anybody who is a young person, or anybody who's got kids, this idea that somehow an alcoholic is somebody who's got, like my dad, got broken capillaries on their face, that drinks from a bag, that all of those definitions of an alcoholic and an addict were in my head, were how something looked, not how it felt. and how it felt is I did not want to get high and I did not want to drink. And I couldn't remember. I couldn't bring into my consciousness. I could not. I had this curious mental blank spot. And in reading those words in chapter 3 of the big book, I realized I have the disease of alcoholism. And I never got that in Alateen because Alateen doesn't have a first step. It's got the general Al-Anon first step, powerless over alcoholism, but not the AA first step. And the AA first step is real simple. It says that the delusion that someday I will be able to drink like regular people, like normal people, has to be smashed. That's the first step in recovery. Now, here I am talking about this 47 years later. And how does that work? How do I, if I've got this mental blank spot, if I can't remember that using and drinking sucks me into the black hole, how have I managed for 47 years to not pick it up? And that is the miracle of AA, as we all know. The miracle of AA is that the process of the 12 steps lay out for us how to become somebody else, how to become a different person, how to have a personality change sufficient. And the reason I wanted you to know a little bit of the backstory, the motel story, the survival story, is that so much of my recovery over time has been a successive mining of that information, successive work. Because I'll tell you, when I got delivered to you when I was 20 years old, I didn't have an education. I didn't have role models for how to have relationships. I didn't know how to do anything. And what I was given by you guys in the program, and in particular, when I went into young people's, I met people that were my age and people that I could relate to, and got involved in ICIPA, Young People's Conference, and the way that we formed as a group of people. I still have friends that were in those ICIPA bid committees from the 70s and 80s. And we put together, it was like practicing life. We would be able to go to these committee meetings and work on projects. And a lot of us, the part of life that we missed, that normal kids get to have, we got to have by doing service work in Alcoholics Anonymous. And not only were we doing the service work, we were fortunate to have some elders in Denver at the time that were very, very centered in the big book. I think by the second year I was sober, I had learned to go through the book in a workshop format, to do the words on the page with a group of people. And I've done that pretty much every year for the last 47 years. In fact, coming up on another round of it here in a few weeks. That grounding of step work, that grounding in service work helped me grow up. It gave me a foundation to have relationships. I had never, I married my first girlfriend. And when I was probably my mid-20s, I had gone back to school. I took intro to English 4 times before I passed it. It took me 12 years to get an undergraduate degree. But I learned from you guys to just keep showing up, keep showing up, keep showing up, keep showing up. And I managed to get an education. Um, my I was married. After we'd been married about 5 years, we had a daughter. And when my daughter Nikki was 3, we had just finished the 85 Ikipa. I had just graduated from college, and I had just started a new job. And that year was significant for me because I was in the fullness of life, in the sense that I was actually like getting a paycheck and driving a car that I didn't have to worry about was going to, stop at the light and not start up again. And I came home from school, and my daughter's mother said, "Look, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm out. I'm not in the mommy wife business anymore." And she left. And I think my good Al-Anon bona fides were pretty well in place at that point, because after she had been gone about a month, I realized my life was really no different. Um, I had essentially been taking care of this little girl the whole time. That little girl's 41 years old now, and I got a chance to grow up, um, being a father to a young girl and a young woman, which most guys don't get that chance, and I was given that chance. Um, you know, that year I also got a job. Um, I got a call and was asked to fly to Atlanta for an interview for a job from Denver. And I had no clothes. I mean, I had nothing, no interview clothes. This was like grown-up stuff, wear a tie. I had no businessman shoes. And they needed me to go the next morning. And the businessman shoes that I had, this was in February of 85. The businessman shoes I had were a pair of wingtip Oxfords that had dust in the little holes, that I had bought at Goodwill for a Halloween costume because I had dressed as Bill Wilson. So I'm frantically looking for something to wear to this interview. And I realized I've got these clodhopper wingtips. I've never worn wingtips except for a joke in my life. And so I put my wingtips on, went into the Denver airport and got them shined up, and went off to my interview in Atlanta. And that was in 85. And I retired from that company 37 years later. It works. This thing works. And the last thing I want to focus on is really the process for me. And I am so blessed to be in Alcoholics Anonymous and be in a program that is actually designed to lift me into that spiritual experience and help me maintain that spiritual experience. And that's, of course, as we all know, the 12 steps. And as I mentioned early on, I went to a workshop. We called it a workshop, but really it was a bunch of guys that got together, led by one of our elder statesmen in Denver. And this was the process. He said, what we're going to do is we're going to start in the preface, and everybody's going to suspend their judgment for the next 3 to 4 months. And we're just going to work the steps. And there are no leaders in this thing. The book is going to tell us what to do. And we started turning pages, and we started looking for the action words, right? We started looking for what is it that it's asking me to do. And the brilliance of the big book was the guys that wrote it, they took all the you shalls out and did the we do's. What this is what we did, not this is what you should do. And being able to use that key to understand the instructions in that first 160s. And it's easy to become book knowledgeable, something I think you alluded to in the beginning, Stephen. It's easy to become book knowledgeable, um, but lose the juice. And it's the juice comes from um, the application of those 12 steps in the current year. And so back in the day, the deal was you're going to go through this, you're going to do these 12 steps, and we're going to do them together. And then when you're done, you're going to go start a group. Because guess what? They wrote it down. It's written down. You don't have to invent it. And I did that. And I went and I asked some other people the next year if they wanted to work the 12 steps together. And some of them said yes. So got a brand new big book because I wasn't interested in what I'd written last time. I was interested in what it was asking me to do this time. And one of the most important parts of that for me is I've realized that there's really two times in my sobriety that I've made connections. And I mean deep, deep kind of connections, the kind of connections that I need to survive. And lots of those start, with my litter mates, the people I got sober with, which I'm still connected to many of them. Because you're vulnerable when you're getting sober. There's no way you can save your ass and save your face at the same time. It's part of the process. The other times in my experience that I can have that same kind of vulnerability is going through the 12 steps with a group of people. And service work is another place. If you want to look good, don't get into service because you're gonna show your ass in service work too. So that process of going through the work every year is kind of like updating, Google Maps. It keeps me from getting lost. And my experience through all of this has brought me in close contact with people. Certainly in Denver, I stayed in Denver for 22 years before I moved to Atlanta. And when I moved to Atlanta, I knew it was a slippery time. The thing about having some time, even 22 years at that point, is it's easy to just kind of go into your spiel. I got you throw out an AA topic, whether it's the first step or the seventh tradition or something out of the 12 and 12, and I can pretty well give you a tight 5 on any of those. The problem with that is that I lose the connection to what's happening with me, right? And the beauty of doing this work with people is that it connects me. When I got to Atlanta, I did what I did in Denver, and I got a group of people together and I said, hey, does anybody want to work the steps in 1997? And when we get together and we work the steps, we're not interested in anybody's greatest hits. This is not about this is not a big book study, which I'm a huge fan of, by the way, big book studies. This is a workshop. It's like going to the gym and getting on the machines. And what that's done for me is it's built connections to me in my group in Atlanta that are as significant as my connections to the people I got sober with in Denver. And as I mentioned, that we're doing it again. There's a group of people that are going to get together in the end of February 2024. And I guess this would be the 25th or 26th year that we've done this in Atlanta. It saves my ass. It connects me to people. It gives me the opportunity to do the work real time. So my life has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger as a result of this program. At the core, I know that if I were to get away from the exercise and the work of the 12 steps, that slowly and surely the insanity would return. And it shows up in forms of being pissed off. It shows up in forms of being irritated with you guys. It shows up in forms of starting to separate myself. And I know that if I get too separated from you guys, that the insanity will return and I will pick up. I mean, we live in a world today where you just can't turn around and there's not something to get off on. I don't want to do that. But it's not about me choosing to not drink or to not drug. It's about me choosing to be in the middle of the bed in Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to share one last thing before I wrap up here, and that's my career at my company. I went from the guy with the Bill Wilson shoes to the guy that ultimately ran the company. And I was given that opportunity because people trusted me, because you could give me responsibilities and I would show up. And each successive stage of growth, each successive stage would come with writing a new inventory. That inventory written on where am I trying to play God today would help me clear the wreckage of the present and be present, be available, be conscious, be a part of the solution. I never have in my time in AA gone through a period where I left AA or was not involved. I have been fortunate. I have gone through some rough times. I have gone through some dark nights of the soul. I have gone through periods where I didn't realize it, but I was playing God in my AA program. If I only just wrote inventory just right, if I only had the right sponsor, if I only did this, if I only did that, then I would get what I needed. And this thing is beautiful because it works on you whether you want it to work on you or not. These crises, these deeper moments of realization and my letting go, the surrendering, the letting go, the surrendering, showing up. There is a God and I ain't it. And this constant waxing on and waxing off, not just from memories back in the day, but the application of this program in my daily life with people that practice it in their daily life, has changed my life. I want to say a little bit more about my family. My mother, who was the person who was taking care of 5 kids and a drunken husband and moving from motel to motel to motel, getting kicked out. She got a job, minimum wage, working at State Farm, just trying to keep the family fed. She started going to Al-Anon when my dad went to AA. She's been in Al-Anon for over 50 years. I asked her the other day, she's 97. In fact, I just talked to her before this, and she's just got back from her pedicure and has pink toenails. She's a beautiful woman. And I asked her, I said, what's the meaning of life? I asked the Al-Anon matriarch, she's got an alcoholic sister. I've got an alcoholic sister, alcoholic daughter. Carol's been sober 30, I think close to 40 years. My brother Carl's been, as I mentioned, in NA, I think 46 years. I've been sober 47 years. My sister Elaine has been in Al-Anon over 50 years. My mother's been in Al-Anon over 50 years. Alcoholics Anonymous saved our family. And I asked my mom, I said, what's the meaning of life, Mom? She said, letting go with love. And here's a woman who, if anybody had a reason to be pissed off and covered up with barnacles, it's her. But the practice of the program, she is one of the most, she's a role model as far as I'm concerned. She's a beautiful woman. And my dad, I need to say something about my father because I had two dads. I had the drunken, violent, crazy dad. And then I had the dad that got sober, the dad that brought me to Alcoholics Anonymous, the dad that started for his family the journey of Alcoholics Anonymous in Al-Anon. And he told me this story a long time ago. He was always using, he never really kind of progressed past hanging cups off the ceiling. He was Mr. Analogy. And so he would always teach me with his stories. And his story was, he said, Jim, you ever see one of those natural dams at the river there at, in like the Roaring Fork up by Aspen? You ever see the little natural dams? And I go, yes, Dad. He goes, you know how those are formed? I said, no, Dad. He said, a branch will come down the river and it'll get stuck between two rocks. And the waves will beat on it and beat on it and beat on it, but it stays there. And pretty soon another stick comes down and it sticks. And then another stick comes down and it sticks. And another stick comes down and it sticks. And before you know it, it stopped the river. He said, that's what we're like. He said, when we make a decision to quit drinking and to quit using, and all the people around us are drinking, and all the people around us are wondering why we're doing this, or they're not supportive, or they're just crazy as hell. He said, staying in that position, we'll get stronger because somebody will come down and add to us, and somebody will come down and add to us. He was the first stick in our family. And, great events have come to pass for me and countless others. It's just a fact. And Alcoholics Anonymous has given me my life, has given me my career, has given me a 25-year marriage with a beautiful woman, has given me a wonderful relationship with my 41-year-old daughter and my 33-year-old son, countless friends, a successful business career. And guess what? I haven't had to drink and I haven't had to use because of you guys. So that's it. Thank you.